A family of 4 disappeared during a mountain trip, presumed victims of a tragic hiking accident. But 3 weeks later, a wild camera captures something that makes everyone question what really happened, revealing a truth so sinister no one could have imagined. The wind whistled across Glacier National Park, Montana, carrying with it the promise of another cold front. Eleanor Whitaker, known to most as Ellie, stepped off the gondola, her weathered hiking boots crunching against the snow-packed trail. At 67, her steps were measured but confident, the gait of someone who had traversed these mountains for decades. Her eyes, still sharp despite the years, scanned the foggy mountain path ahead. The visibility was poor, but that didn't concern her. She knew these trails better than most, had walked them, taught on them, rescued people from them for over 30 years as a park ranger and wilderness survival instructor. She adjusted her backpack and made her way toward the cabin-style lodge that served as a waypoint for hikers. Its wooden structure stood resolute against the mountainside, smoke curling from the chimney. As she dropped her heavy pack in the foyer, stamping snow from her boots, a familiar face looked up from behind the counter. "Ms. Whitaker?" The local clerk's face brightened with recognition. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." "Hello, Tom," Ellie acknowledged, her voice carrying the weight of her purpose. Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Any news about your family?" Ellie shook her head, lines deepening around her eyes. To most visitors, she was Eleanor the Old Ranger, a legend among the park staff and regular hikers. Her reputation for leading women's survival retreats in retirement had only enhanced the respect she'd earned during her 3 decades of service. "Not yet," she replied, unzipping her coat. "That's why I'm back." Tom nodded solemnly. Everyone in town knew about the Whitaker family tragedy. Daniel, Ellie's son, along with his wife Rachel, and their twin girls, Ivy and Wren, had been missing for nearly a month now. What started as a routine weekend hike had turned into every family's nightmare. Ellie pulled out a stack of missing person posters from her pack. The top one showed a smiling family of 4, Daniel in his stocky green hoodie, Rachel with her warm smile, and the twins, Ivy in bright yellow and Wren in purple, their matching grins revealing identical gaps where baby teeth had fallen out. "I was hoping to put these up, replace the old ones," she said, holding the stack out slightly. "Around the lodge and at the trailheads." "Of course," Tom replied without hesitation. "Anything to help. The manager already approved it. He said to tell you if there's anything else we can do, just ask." "Thank you," Ellie said, grateful for the kindness that had been shown to her throughout this ordeal. As she moved through the lodge, pinning posters to bulletin boards and near entrances, Ellie couldn't help but replay the events of that day in her mind. It had been a typical Saturday morning when Daniel called, inviting her to join their hike. "Come on, Mom," he'd said, his voice playful over the phone. "The girls have been asking for their Grandma Ellie stories all week." She'd wanted to go, had almost canceled her other plans, but the charity event she'd committed to months before couldn't be rescheduled. It was a fundraiser for wilderness education for underprivileged youth, a cause close to her heart. "Next time," she'd promised, "take lots of pictures for me." And they had. Midday, as she was setting up displays at the charity event, her phone had buzzed with a message from Daniel. It was a perfect family portrait, the 4 of them smiling broadly against the backdrop of the mountains. She'd smiled, noting how they'd taken it at the same spot as always. Rachel had mentioned once that she wanted to create a time-lapse of sorts, showing how the girls grew up against the unchanging mountains. It had seemed like such a sweet, sentimental idea. Hours later, when the charity event had wrapped up and Ellie returned home, she noticed several missed calls from Daniel. There was a text message, too. "Weather turning bad up here. Cutting the hike short. Talk later." She'd tried calling him back immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. Rachel's phone did the same. At first, Ellie had told herself not to worry. Cell service was notoriously spotty in parts of the park, but when evening came and they still hadn't returned, The worry solidified into fear. That night, she'd called the police. By morning, search parties were combing the most frequently used trails. Volunteers from the community showed up in droves, many who remembered Daniel from when he was a boy, trailing after his ranger mother on the safer paths. After a week of intense searching, with helicopters scanning from above and teams on foot below, the police had begun to voice what Ellie refused to accept. The likelihood of finding them alive was diminishing by the day. Ms. Whitaker, the search coordinator, had said gently, "We've covered every likely area. At this point, with the weather systems that move through, I'm sorry, but we have to consider the possibility of a tragic accident." But Ellie knew her son. Daniel was experienced in these mountains, had grown up respecting their dangers. He would never have put his family at risk, would have read the weather signs, would have sought shelter, or turned back before things got dangerous. Something else had happened, something beyond a simple hiking accident. Which is why, despite the police scaling back their search efforts, Ellie had returned to the mountain. If no one else would find her family, she would do it herself. As she stepped outside to post more flyers along the trailheads, her fingers stiffened in the cold. She secured each poster carefully, making sure they wouldn't be torn away by the wind. With each one, she thought of Daniel's last photo, the family smiling, unaware of what lay ahead. A young couple walked past, their gazes lingering on the poster before moving to Ellie's face with recognition and pity. She'd grown accustomed to those looks over the past weeks. But pity wouldn't find her family. Determination would. With the posters secured at the main trailhead, Ellie stared up at the mountain, its peak obscured by clouds. Somewhere up there, the answers waited. And she would find them, no matter what. Ellie continued her methodical posting of the missing person flyers along the hiking trail, stopping hikers as they passed to ask if they'd seen her family. Each conversation followed the same pattern: sympathetic eyes, shaking heads, mumbled hopes for a happy ending. After the 20th, Ellie had almost resigned herself to another day of disappointment. Then, as she secured a flyer to a trail marker about 2 miles up, a figure emerged from between the trees to her right. A man in his 50s, dressed in camouflage with an orange safety vest, approached her with purposeful strides. "Excuse me," he called out, his breath visible in the cold air. "Mind if I take one of those?" Ellie turned, studying him. He had the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in, a thick beard peppered with gray, and alert eyes that seemed to catalog everything around him. "Of course," she replied, handing him a flyer. "Name's Cal Jennings," he said, extending a gloved hand. "Local hunter, been coming to these mountains for 30 years. Ellie shook his hand. "Eleanor Whitaker. Friends call me Ellie." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "The ranger? Heard a lot about you over the years. Respect what you've done for the park." Cal studied the flyer intently, his brow furrowing. "When did you say they went missing?" 3 weeks ago, almost a month now." Cal reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device. "You know, I think I should check something. I've got trail cameras set up for tracking game movements." Ellie's pulse quickened. "You think you might have caught something?" "Maybe. Worth looking?" Cal manipulated the device's screen, scrolling through what appeared to be a series of photos and video clips. His movements became slower, more deliberate, as he focused on particular segments. "What is it?" Ellie asked, unable to contain her hope. "Did you see something?" Cal didn't answer immediately. Instead, he continued reviewing footage, occasionally glancing between the screen and the flyer in his hand. Then he stopped, his finger hovering over the display. "Miss Whitaker, I think you should see this." He turned the device toward her. The footage was grainy, the forest around it shrouded in mist, but Ellie's heart nearly stopped when 3 figures moved across the frame. A woman with shoulder-length hair and 2 small children, all moving with evident caution through the underbrush. The woman wore a light-colored jacket, coral or pink, while the children were dressed in yellow and lavender. "That's them," Ellie whispered, her voice catching. "That's Rachel and the twins." Cal nodded, his expression grave. "I thought it might be. Look at the timestamp." The date in the corner of the screen showed that the footage had been captured just 3 days ago. 3 days? Ellie's voice rose with disbelief and renewed hope. They're alive? But where's Daniel? My son should be with them. Cal zoomed in as much as the footage quality would allow. This is a fixed camera. It only captures what passes directly in front of it. Your son could have been walking behind them, or he might have taken a different route. There's no way to tell from just this. Ellie stared at the frozen image, drinking in the sight of her family. They looked worn and shaken, moving with the cautious steps of those navigating unfamiliar terrain. At one point, they had turned slightly toward the camera, but didn't seem to notice it, likely well hidden for its intended purpose of tracking wildlife undetected. "Where exactly was this taken?" Ellie asked, urgency in her voice. Cal pulled up a GPS map on his device. "Here," he pointed to a marked location. "It's deep in the northern section, about 8 miles from where we're standing now. The terrain gets rough up there, lots of unmarked ravines, unstable slopes." Ellie studied the map, realization dawning. "That's outside the search zone. The police never went that far north because they said it was too dangerous. No maintained trails, high avalanche risk after the storms we had." "Exactly. Not somewhere a family with young children would typically venture." "Which is why no one thought to look there," Ellie concluded. "Cal, I need a copy of this footage. I need to show it to the police immediately." Cal nodded, already working on transferring the file. "I can email it to you right now, and here," he scribbled on a small notepad, "is my number. Call me if you need anything else. I know those northern reaches pretty well." "Thank you," Ellie said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is the first real lead we've had in weeks." "I hope it helps," Cal replied, "and I hope you find them safe." As they finished the file transfer, Cal checked his watch. "I need to head back down. Getting late, and I've got what I came for already." He gestured to his hunting pack. "Will you be all right?" "Yes," Ellie said, clutching her phone with the precious footage. "I'm going back to my cabin to call the police right away." They walked together toward the lodge, the path easier to navigate going downhill. Ellie's mind raced with renewed possibilities. Her family was alive, at least as of 3 days ago. The police would have to restart the search now. They'd have to look in areas they'd previously dismissed. When they reached the lodge, Cal tipped his hat to her. "Remember, call if you need anything. Good luck, Ms. Whitaker." "Thank you, Cal," Ellie replied, watching as he headed toward the parking area. She turned and hurried toward her rented cabin, new determination in every step. For the first time in weeks, she felt something beyond grief and desperation. She felt hope. The moment Ellie entered her cabin, she pulled out her phone and dialed the police department. Her fingers trembled slightly as she navigated to the saved contact for Detective Marshall, the lead officer on her family's case. "Detective Marshall speaking," came the prompt answer. "This is Eleanor Whitaker," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've found evidence that my family is alive." There was a brief pause before the detective responded. "What kind of evidence, Ms. Whitaker?" "Video footage from a trail camera. It shows Rachel and the twins moving through the forest just 3 days ago." Ellie explained the encounter with Cal Jennings and the location where the footage had been captured. "I'm sending you the video now," she continued, pulling up her email. "You need to see this, Detective. We need to restart the search immediately." As Marshall reviewed the footage, Ellie paced the small cabin, glancing occasionally at the window where daylight was already beginning to fade. It was nearly 4 p.m., and this time of year, darkness fell quickly in the mountains. "This does appear to be your daughter-in-law and granddaughters," Marshall conceded after a moment. "However, Ms. Whitaker, we can't begin a search operation this late in the day." "What do you mean?" Ellie demanded. "They're out there right now." "I understand your urgency," Marshall replied, his tone measured. "But as a former park ranger, you know better than anyone the dangers of nighttime search operations in this terrain. The area you're describing is particularly treacherous." Ellie moved to the window, watching as park rangers were already guiding day hikers back down the mountain trails. Dark clouds were gathering above the peaks, promising more snow. "The forecast is calling for another snowfall tonight," Marshall continued. "We can't risk sending teams into unmarked territory with limited visibility and deteriorating conditions. We'd only be creating more potential victims." As much as it pained her, Ellie knew he was right. She had conducted enough rescue operations herself to understand the protocols and the reasoning behind them. "What about helicopters?" she asked, grasping at alternatives. "Not in these conditions, and certainly not at night," Marshall replied. "Additionally, from what I can see in this footage, they don't appear to be in immediate distress. They're moving purposefully, not like people who are critically injured or lost." Ellie sank into a chair, struggling with the frustration of knowing her family was so close, yet still unreachable. "So we wait until morning?" "First light," Marshall confirmed. "I'll coordinate with the park authorities tonight. We'll assemble teams and plan the safest approach to that area. Ms. Whitaker, I promise you, we will do everything possible to find them tomorrow." "I understand," she said reluctantly, "but I want to be part of the search team." "Given your experience, I think that can be arranged. Just be at the ranger station by 6 a.m. After ending the call, Ellie sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the frozen image of Rachel and the twins on her phone. They were alive, but something wasn't right. Where was Daniel? Why hadn't he been with them on the camera footage? Cal's explanation that Daniel might have been out of frame or taking a different route made logical sense. But Ellie knew her son. He would never have separated from his family in remote, dangerous terrain, especially with the twins. He was too protective, too cautious. And why were they in that specific area to begin with? It was far off the trails they usually took, in a zone known to be dangerous even for experienced hikers. Daniel wouldn't have led his family there without a compelling reason. The questions multiplied, offering no answers, only deepening her concern. Ellie stood and moved to the window again, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the first snowflakes began to fall. Somewhere up there, in the growing darkness, her family was facing another night alone in the wilderness. "Hold on," she whispered, her breath fogging the cold glass. "Just hold on until morning." As evening settled over the mountain, Ellie's cabin felt increasingly claustrophobic. The walls seemed to close in, and the silence amplified the anxious thoughts whirling through her mind. Despite the warmth from the small fireplace, a chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. Looking at her watch, 6:30 p.m., Ellie decided to join the communal dinner at the lodge's main hall. Being alone with her thoughts tonight would only feed her anxiety. She bundled up against the cold and made her way across the courtyard toward the main building. The snowfall had intensified, large flakes drifting down in the glow of the outdoor lamps. The trails were completely empty now. Every sensible hiker had returned to safety hours ago. As she approached the lodge, she could see a group gathered around the large stone fireplace in the central hall. The sound of conversation and the occasional laugh filtered through the glass doors. It felt painfully normal, another evening in the mountains for most of these people, while her world remained upended. Pushing through the doors, Ellie felt the immediate rush of warmth and the smell of food. Heads turned as she entered, conversations faltering momentarily before resuming with forced casualness. She'd grown accustomed to being the subject of whispers over the past weeks. She took a cup of hot water from the drink station and pulled an instant noodle cup from her pocket. As she found a seat at the edge of the gathering, not quite part of it, but not completely separate either, she became aware of two men talking nearby. They were about her age, perhaps a little older, their voices lowered but still audible in the momentary lulls of the larger conversation. "That's Eleanor Whitaker, isn't it?" one of them said. "The millionaire woman?" "Yeah," the other replied. "What a shame. Donates all that money to the Wilderness Education Foundation last month, and now her family's missing. Karma can be cruel." "If it were my family," the first man continued, unaware that Ellie could hear every word, "I'd be out there searching right now, storm be damned, 100%. "Well, she's just a woman, and she's doing this alone," the other replied, not unkindly. "Can't be easy at her age." Ellie stared into her cup of noodles, the steam rising to warm her face, which had gone rigid with suppressed emotion. The conversations around her continued, most people giving her respectful space, some nodding politely when they caught her eye. But she couldn't focus on anything except those words echoing in her head. "I'd be out there searching right now, storm be damned." Would Daniel wait until morning if it were her missing on the mountain? The answer came immediately. No, he wouldn't rest until he found her. With renewed resolve, Ellie finished just enough of her meal to stave off hunger, then quietly slipped away from the gathering. No one seemed to notice her departure as she made her way back to her cabin. Once inside, she moved with purpose. From her bags, she pulled out her most reliable hiking gear, equipment that had seen her through countless wilderness challenges. Thermal layers, waterproof outer shell, reinforced boots. Her old search and rescue pack, still meticulously organized with emergency supplies, first aid kit, and survival tools. She checked her GPS device, ensuring she had both online maps and offline backups loaded. Cal's coordinates were already marked. She packed extra batteries, energy bars, and her sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures. As she worked, a small voice of caution whispered that she was being reckless. The police and park rangers would be searching at first light. She was 67 years old, facing treacherous terrain in worsening weather. But a stronger voice, the voice that had guided her through 3 decades of wilderness rescue, reminded her that every hour mattered in survival situations. And if there was anyone who could safely navigate these mountains in adverse conditions, it was her. With her pack secured, Ellie slipped out of her cabin, carefully avoiding the main paths where she might be seen. The snow was falling more heavily now, already accumulating on the ground. She pulled her headlamp from her pocket, but kept it off for now, not wanting to draw attention as she moved past the dimly lit cabins. Once she reached the trailhead, she paused to orient herself. According to Cal's GPS coordinates, she needed to head northwest, away from the maintained trails and into the less-traveled wilderness. It would be a challenging hike even in daylight. In the growing darkness and snowfall, it would test every skill she possessed. But her family was out there, and she was going to find them. Ellie switched on her headlamp, took a deep breath of the cold mountain air, and began her ascent. The snow crunched beneath her boots, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. With each step, the sounds of the lodge faded behind her, replaced by the whisper of snow and wind through the pines. The terrain grew steeper, the path less distinct. By the time she had hiked 2 hours, the snow was falling so heavily that her visibility was reduced to just a few feet ahead. Time seemed to lose meaning as she pushed forward, checking her GPS regularly to ensure she stayed on course. As the hours passed, the temperature plummeted further. The wind picked up, driving the snow horizontally, stinging any exposed skin. Ellie's lips began to feel numb, her fingers stiff despite her insulated gloves. The realization dawned on her that she was approaching her limits. If the conditions worsened any further, she would have no choice but to find shelter and wait out the storm. Just as she was considering her options for setting up an emergency camp, a faint glow caught her eye through the curtain of snow. At first, she thought it might be a trick of light or her own exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. But as she moved cautiously forward, the glow resolved into what unmistakably appeared to be a window, light spilling from a structure nestled among the trees. A cabin? In this remote section of wilderness, someone had built a cabin. Hope surged through Ellie's tired body. If nothing else, it offered shelter from the increasingly dangerous storm. At best, it might hold answers about her family. She approached carefully, her headlamp illuminating a small, sturdy structure partially protected by the surrounding pines. Smoke curled from a chimney, confirming that someone was inside. With trembling hands from cold or anticipation she couldn't tell, Ellie knocked on the wooden door. No response came. She knocked again, louder this time, and called out, "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, I need help." Several long moments passed in silence. Then, just as she was about to knock a third time, the door creaked open. Ellie found herself staring into a face she had seen only in photographs and missing person posters for the past 3 weeks. Rachel stood in the doorway, her expression frozen in shock. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved. Then Rachel seemed to snap out of her stunned state and rushed forward, pulling Ellie inside. "Ellie? What are you doing here?" Rachel stammered, helping her mother-in-law shed her snow-covered outer layer. Before Ellie could respond, small voices called from deeper in the cabin. "Mom?" "Who is it?" 2 small figures peered from behind a wooden chair frame. Ivy and Wren, their eyes widening as they recognized their grandmother. "Grandma Ellie!" they cried in unison, rushing forward but stopping short, suddenly shy or uncertain. Ellie sank to her knees, overcome by emotion and exhaustion. The warmth of the cabin's fire began to thaw her frozen extremities, sending painful tingles through her hands and feet. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the flood of relief at seeing her granddaughters alive. Rachel moved quickly to the small kitchen area, returning with a steaming mug. "Here, drink this. You're half frozen." As Ellie sipped the warm liquid, reconstituted powdered milk, she realized, Rachel ushered the twins back toward their makeshift bed. "It's late, girls. Back to bed now. Grandma Ellie is tired and needs to warm up. You both can talk to her tomorrow." Reluctantly, the twins shuffled over to a small bed in the corner, curling up together beneath a thick blanket. Rachel handed them each a cup of milk, and after they eagerly gulped down the white liquid, she tucked them in with practiced ease, murmuring something that drew soft giggles before they finally settled. "Good night, Grandma Ellie," Ivy said, her voice soft. Wren echoed the words a moment later, already mid-yawn, her eyes half closed. One of the girls drifted off almost immediately, which surprised Ellie. Soon after, their breathing evened out, soft and steady. The warmth of the blanket and the comfort of each other's presence seemed to dissolve the day's weariness, leaving them peaceful and still. As the initial shock began to wear off, questions flooded Ellie's mind. But the most pressing one pushed its way to her lips first. "Rachel," she said quietly, keeping her voice low enough not to carry to the twins. "Where's Daniel?" Rachel's face fell at the mention of Daniel's name. She moved to the small wooden table in the center of the cabin and sank into a chair, gesturing for Ellie to join her. Ellie lowered herself into the chair opposite Rachel, still warming her hands around the mug. The cabin was simple but sturdy, a single room with a kitchen area, the small bed the twins shared, and a leather sofa. A small wood stove provided both heat and a cooking surface, and shelves along one wall held supplies. Canned goods, bottled water, basic tools. "Rachel," Ellie pressed, "what happened?" "Where is my son?" she asked again. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She stared down at her own mug, turning it slowly between her palms before answering. "We had an accident," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "That day we went hiking. We didn't check the weather forecast properly. We ended up caught in that terrible snowstorm 3 weeks ago." "But why were you up here?" Ellie asked, struggling to keep her voice calm. This area is marked as dangerous on all the park maps. Daniel knows better than to bring children into this zone." Rachel bit her lip. He wanted to try something different. We've been hiking the same trails for years, and the girls were getting bored. He thought we'd just explore a little ways into the less traveled areas, stay on the lower slopes where it's safer. But then the storm hit so suddenly. Going back seemed more dangerous than pressing forward. She paused, wiping at her eyes. "We were lucky to find this cabin. It saved our lives that first night." Ellie nodded, understanding how a shelter in such conditions would have been a godsend, but she still didn't have her answer. "And Daniel?" she prompted. Rachel's face crumpled, and for a moment she couldn't speak. When she finally found her voice again, it was broken with grief. The next morning, when the snow had let up a little, Daniel said he would hike out to get help. He thought if he could reach an area with cell service or find a park ranger. Her voice trailed off. I waited. Hours turned into a day. Another storm moved in, worse than the first. I couldn't leave the girls alone to go looking for him. "Did you ever find him?" Ellie asked, her throat tight with dread. Rachel shook her head, tears now flowing freely. "Number. After the second storm passed, I tried to search nearby, but with the twins, I couldn't go far. And then more bad weather came. We've been trapped here, waiting for conditions to improve enough to try making it back to the main trails." Ellie's heart felt as though it was being squeezed in a vice. "So Daniel is—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know for certain," Rachel admitted, "but it's been 3 weeks. I've had to accept that he—" She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. After a moment, Ellie asked the question that had been nagging at her since she arrived. "Do the girls know?" Rachel lowered her hands, composing herself with visible effort. "They did, eventually. They're smart, always asking questions. By the second week, they knew something was very wrong. I had to tell them that Daddy might not be coming back." Ellie glanced toward the small bed where her granddaughters slept, their matching faces peaceful in the dim light of the cabin. The thought of them processing such devastating news broke her heart. "But why did you stay here?" Ellie asked, turning back to Rachel. "It's been 3 weeks. Surely there were breaks in the weather when you could have tried to make it back down." Rachel's expression grew haunted. "I was afraid. Maybe if it was just me, I might have risked it. But with the twins, after losing Daniel?" She shook her head. "I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to them too. So we stayed, using the supplies we found here." Ellie rose from her chair, suddenly needing to move. She walked to the kitchen area and examined the shelves more closely. Most of the food was canned, beans, soups, vegetables, but there were also packages of dried meat and UHT milk that looked relatively fresh. "These supplies," Ellie said, picking up one of the milk boxes. "They don't seem like they've been sitting here for years." "No," Rachel agreed. "I think someone uses this cabin regularly. A hunter, maybe. There's enough here to last us a while longer." Ellie set the milk down and moved to dispose of her empty mug. As she approached the small trash bin near the door, something caught her eye, a glint of metal beneath a loose floorboard. Crouching down, she examined the area more closely. "There's something under here," she murmured. Rachel quickly stood and moved toward her. "What is it?" Ellie worked her fingers into the gap between the boards and lifted. The floorboard came up easily, revealing a small space beneath. There, nestled in the dust, was a man's ring, a wedding band with a distinctive diamond inlay. Ellie's breath caught as she lifted it out. The ring was clean, unmarred by scratches or dirt one might expect if it had been lost beneath a floor for any length of time. "This is Daniel's wedding ring," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. Rachel stared at it, her expression unreadable for a moment before she reached for it. "It must have slipped off his finger that first night," she said quickly. "We were all so cold, and our hands were numb. It probably fell through the crack without him noticing." Ellie handed her the ring, watching as Rachel slipped it onto her thumb for safekeeping. Something about the explanation didn't sit right, but Ellie couldn't articulate what exactly bothered her. She glanced around the cabin again, noting details she had missed before. The substantial pile of chopped firewood by the door, far more than one would expect for an abandoned cabin. The cabinet behind Rachel that was slightly ajar, revealing not just canned goods, but fresh supplies. "Rachel," Ellie said slowly, "if this cabin is abandoned, why is there so much firewood? And those supplies, some of them look new." A flicker of something, alarm, guilt, crossed Rachel's face before she composed herself. "I told you, I think someone uses it regularly. Maybe they've been by since we've been here." "And they didn't see you? Didn't offer help?" "We hide when we hear anyone approaching," Rachel explained. "After everything that's happened, I didn't know who to trust." Ellie nodded, but the explanation did little to settle the unease growing within her. She turned back toward the kitchen area, intending to ask more questions, when a sudden movement caught her peripheral vision. In the split second before pain exploded across the back of her head, Ellie saw Rachel behind her, arms raised high, the butt of a hunting shotgun clutched in her hands. Then darkness claimed her. Consciousness returned to Ellie in painful fragments. First came the throbbing in her head, a steady pulse of agony that radiated from the base of her skull. Then the awareness of cold. Her extremities felt numb despite the cabin's interior. Finally, the smell, something acrid and chemical that made her throat constrict. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the disorientation. The cabin was dark now, the fire reduced to embers that cast long shadows across the walls. Through the windows she could see that the snowstorm had passed, leaving a clear night sky beyond the glass. When she tried to move, panic surged through her. Her arms and legs wouldn't respond. Looking down, she discovered why. She was bound to a wooden chair with rope, the bindings tight enough to cut into her skin. The smell grew stronger, making her cough. Gas? There was gas leaking in the cabin. Ellie's gaze darted around the room, searching for Rachel and the twins. The small bed in the corner was empty, the blankets thrown aside. No one else was in the cabin. The realization hit her with brutal clarity. Rachel had left her tied up in a cabin filling with gas, with a smoldering fire that would eventually catch and trigger an explosion. She meant for Ellie to die here. But why? The question burned as fiercely as the pain in her head, but Ellie knew she couldn't dwell on it now. Survival came first. She took stock of her situation. The ropes around her wrists were tight but not expertly tied. If she could create enough slack, she might be able to work her way free. The chair itself was old but sturdy, not easily broken. Ellie began rocking the chair, small movements at first, testing its stability. Each motion sent fresh waves of pain through her head, but she pushed through it. The gas smell was getting stronger by the minute. She didn't have the luxury of time. With a sudden lurch, she threw her weight sideways, toppling the chair onto its side. The impact jarred her injured head, sending stars across her vision, but she felt the chair crack slightly. Encouraged, she repeated the motion, slamming the chair against the floor again and again until one of the legs splintered. The broken leg created just enough give in the structure that Ellie could maneuver her bound hands toward her pocket. Her fingers, stiff with cold and restricted circulation, fumbled for several agonizing seconds before closing around what she sought, a small folding knife she always carried. Opening it one-handed while bound was a challenge that required every bit of dexterity she possessed. When the blade finally clicked into place, she began sawing at the ropes around her wrists, careful not to cut herself in the process. The gas smell was now overwhelming, making her head swim. Somewhere in the cabin, a small flame from the dying embers caught something. There was a soft whoosh as fire bloomed near the fireplace area. The rope around one wrist gave way, just as the first flames began racing across the wooden floor toward the kitchen area. Ellie worked faster, freeing her other wrist and then quickly untying her ankles. Standing made her dizzy, but adrenaline propelled her forward. She stumbled to the door, only to find it locked. Whether with a key or by some external means, she couldn't tell. The fire was spreading rapidly now, consuming the aged wood with hungry efficiency. Grabbing one of the remaining firewood logs, Ellie approached the nearest window. The glass was old and single-paned, vulnerable, especially to a woman who had spent decades developing the physical strength required for wilderness survival. With a grunt of effort, she swung the log against the window. The glass cracked but held. A second blow shattered it, sending shards flying outward into the snow. Ellie used the log to clear the remaining glass from the frame, ignoring the cuts that opened on her hands as she worked. Behind her, the fire reached the kitchen. There was a terrifying moment when the flames made contact with the highest concentration of gas. A whoosh of air and then a burst of intense heat that singed her hair and pushed her forward with its force. Ellie didn't hesitate. She climbed through the window, the sharp edges of broken glass catching on her clothing and cutting into her leg as she maneuvered through the tight space. She fell heavily into the snow outside, the cold a shocking contrast to the inferno behind her. Rolling away from the cabin, she watched as flames engulfed the structure. The warm glow that had seemed so welcoming hours ago now revealed itself as the deadly trap it had become. Her supplies, her GPS, her pack, her means of communication and navigation, all of it was burning inside. She was alone in the wilderness without equipment, injured, and with no clear sense of her location relative to the lodge. But she was alive. And somewhere out there, Rachel was on the run with the twins, children who belonged to Ellie's son, Daniel, the very man Rachel had almost certainly killed. Ellie couldn't ignore that truth. If Daniel's death had truly been an accident, then why had Rachel tried to kill her too when she started asking too many questions? Ellie staggered to her feet, wincing at the pain that shot through her leg, where the glass had cut her. The night was clear now, the stars brilliantly visible above the tree line. She oriented herself using the North Star, recalling that the lodge lay to the west of the cabin. But before she could take a step in that direction, a faint sound caught her attention, a child's voice, high and frightened, calling out from somewhere in the forest. Forgetting her own injuries, Ellie moved toward the sound, her feet sinking into the deep snow. The voice came again, clearer this time, unmistakably one of the twins. She pushed through a stand of pine trees, following the cries, until she emerged into a small clearing. There, against a rock outcropping, a small figure in a purple jacket was huddled, one leg extended at an unnatural angle. "Wren?" Ellie called softly, approaching slowly so as not to frighten the child further. The girl looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Grandma Ellie?" "It hurts. My leg really hurts." Ellie crouched beside her granddaughter, carefully examining the injury. Even in the dim starlight, she could see that Wren's leg was either broken or severely sprained. The ankle was swollen to twice its normal size. "What happened, sweetheart?" Ellie asked, removing her scarf to create a makeshift splint. "Where's your mom and Ivy?" Wren sniffled. "I fell down the hill. Mom tried to help me, but then she said we had to keep going. She said..." The child's voice broke. "She said something about sacrifice, and then she took Ivy and left me here." Rage unlike anything Ellie had ever experienced flooded through her. Rachel had abandoned an injured child in the wilderness, her own daughter, in freezing temperatures that would have killed her before morning. "I'm here now," Ellie said, working to keep her voice calm and reassuring. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe." With gentle movements, she secured the splint around Wren's ankle, using branches and her scarf to immobilize the joint. Then she lifted the child into her arms, cradling her against her chest. "It's going to be okay," she promised, turning toward what she hoped was the path back to civilization. "Hold on tight. We have a long walk ahead of us." Wren wrapped her thin arms around Ellie's neck, her body shivering with cold and shock. Despite her own injuries and exhaustion, Ellie found new reserves of strength as she began the arduous journey down the mountain, each step carrying precious cargo. She had no equipment, no map, and an injured child to protect. But she had decades of experience in these mountains and an iron determination that would not yield to pain or fatigue or fear. Somewhere ahead, Rachel was fleeing with Ivy, and when Ellie reached safety with Wren, she would make sure that woman never harmed another member of her family again. The journey down the mountain was a grueling test of endurance. Every muscle in Ellie's body screamed for rest, but she pushed forward, Wren's weight in her arms a constant reminder of what was at stake. The child had fallen into a fitful sleep, occasional whimpers escaping her lips when pain broke through her exhaustion. Ellie navigated by starlight and memory, choosing the gentler slopes when possible, carefully picking her way around obstacles she could barely see in the darkness. Each step required careful consideration. A fall now could be catastrophic for both of them. Hours passed this way, marked only by the slow movement of stars across the sky. As the eastern horizon began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Ellie caught glimpses of familiar landmarks. They were approaching the maintained trails that would lead back to the lodge. "Wren," she said softly, rousing the child. "Look, sweetie, we're almost there." The girl stirred, blinking groggily at their surroundings. Her face was pale with pain and cold, but a flicker of hope appeared in her eyes when she saw the trail markers ahead. "Is Mom there?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. The question caught Ellie off guard. How could she explain to a 7-year-old that her mother had tried to kill them both? That she had abandoned Wren to die in the snow? "I don't know," she answered truthfully. "But there are people who can help us, and that's what matters right now." The final stretch of their journey took them past the outlying cabins and toward the central lodge. As they emerged from the tree line, Ellie could see early morning hikers preparing for their day, staff members setting up equipment. Summoning her last reserves of strength, she called out, "Help! We need help here." Heads turned. There was a moment of shocked stillness before people began running toward them. Ellie's legs finally gave out, and she sank to her knees in the snow, still cradling Wren protectively. "Get medical assistance," someone shouted, "and call the manager." Hands reached for them, helping Ellie to her feet, others carefully taking Wren from her arms. The warmth of the lodge's foyer enveloped them as they were guided inside, voices overlapping in concern and confusion. "It's Eleanor Whitaker," she heard someone say. "And one of the missing children." The lodge manager appeared, his face registering shock as he recognized her. "Ms. Whitaker, what happened? How did you—" "Call the police," Ellie interrupted, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Rachel tried to kill me. She left Wren injured in the snow to die." A hushed silence fell over the gathered crowd. Some had begun recording the scene on their phones, but Ellie was beyond caring about privacy now. "We need to warm them up," the manager said, recovering his composure, "and the child needs medical attention immediately." They were guided to the large fireplace in the main room, where blankets appeared from somewhere, wrapped around their shoulders. A staff member with first aid training began examining Wren's injured leg, while another brought hot drinks. "Ms. Whitaker," the manager said, crouching beside her. "The gondola operators reported seeing a woman with a child early this morning. They weren't certain, but they thought it might have been—" "Rachel," Ellie finished for him, "with Ivy. Which way were they heading?" "Down the mountain, apparently. They moved quickly, didn't stop to talk to anyone." Ellie's heart sank. If Rachel had already made it down the gondola, she could be anywhere by now. The wail of sirens announced the arrival of emergency services. Within minutes, the lodge was filled with police officers and paramedics. Wren was carefully transferred to a stretcher, paramedics stabilizing her leg and checking her vital signs. "I want to stay with my granddaughter," Ellie insisted as they prepared to move Wren. "Of course. one of the paramedics assured her. "We'll transport you both to the hospital." As they were being loaded into the medical helicopter, the quickest way to reach the nearest hospital, a police officer approached. "Ms. Whitaker, we need to take a statement from you as soon as possible. We've already received conflicting information." "What do you mean?" Ellie asked, not releasing her hold on Wren's hand. "A woman identifying herself as Rachel Whitaker was brought to the hospital earlier by a hunter who found her and a child at the park's main entrance. She's made some serious allegations against you." Ellie stared at the officer in disbelief. "What kind of allegations?" "She claims you tracked them to a cabin where they'd been sheltering after her husband's disappearance. According to her statement, when you learned Daniel was presumed dead, you became enraged and attempted to harm her and the children." "That's absurd," Ellie said, anger giving her renewed energy. "She knocked me unconscious and left me to die in a cabin filling with gas. She abandoned Wren with a broken leg in freezing temperatures." The officer nodded, making notes. "We'll need formal statements from both of you, and from the child, when she's able." "Her name is Wren," Ellie said firmly, "and she needs medical attention more than you need her statement right now." "Of course, we'll meet you at the hospital." The officer stepped back as the helicopter crew secured the doors. As the helicopter lifted off, Ellie held tight to Wren's hand, watching the mountain landscape fall away beneath them. In just hours, she had found her family, lost her son all over again, and nearly died at the hands of the woman he had married. And now that same woman was attempting to twist the narrative, to paint Ellie as the villain. The thought of Rachel holding Ivy, potentially poisoning the child's mind against her own grandmother and twin sister, made Ellie's blood boil. The paramedic monitoring Wren glanced at Ellie with concern. "Ma'am, I need to check your injuries too. You have lacerations that need cleaning and possible concussion from the blow to your head." Ellie nodded absently, allowing the medic to examine the wound at the back of her skull. Her mind was racing ahead to what waited at the hospital. Rachel's lies, a legal system that would have to sort truth from fiction, and the heartbreaking task of helping her granddaughters understand what had happened to their family. "Grandma Ellie?" Wren's voice was faint but clear. "I'm scared." Ellie leaned closer, smoothing the child's hair back from her forehead. "I know, sweetheart, but I'm right here with you, and I'm not going anywhere." It was a promise she intended to keep, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The hospital corridor bustled with activity, nurses moving efficiently between rooms, doctors consulting charts, families waiting anxiously for news of loved ones. Ellie sat outside the radiology department, a bandage covering the wound on the back of her head, smaller dressings on her cut hands. The doctors had confirmed she had a mild concussion, but no skull fracture. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation, but Ellie had refused to be admitted to a different floor from Wren. So here she sat, waiting while her granddaughter underwent x-rays to determine the extent of her injuries. A police officer stood nearby. Whether to protect her or to ensure she didn't leave, Ellie wasn't entirely sure. After the helicopter landed, they had been separated briefly for initial medical assessments. During that time, more officers had arrived, and the atmosphere had grown increasingly tense. The elevator doors opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. Cal Jennings, the hunter who had shown her the camera footage. His expression was grave as he approached, nodding respectfully to the officer before addressing Ellie. "Ms. Whitaker, I heard what happened up on the mountain. I'm glad you're safe." "Cal?" Ellie studied his face, trying to read his intentions. "Thank you for coming, but I'm surprised to see you here." He glanced at the officer, then back to Ellie. "I need to talk to you, and to the police. There's something I have to tell you both." Before she could respond, the door to the radiology department opened, and a doctor emerged with a tablet in hand. "Ms. Whitaker, your granddaughter's x-rays show a clean break to the tibia. She'll need surgery to properly set the bone and place pins to hold it in position while it heals. "When can you do the procedure?" Ellie asked, rising from her seat. "We're preparing an operating room now. We'll need consent forms signed, and then we can proceed." Ellie nodded. "I want to see her first." The doctor guided her back into the department where Wren lay on a gurney, her leg immobilized and an IV in her arm. The girl's face brightened slightly when she saw her grandmother. "The doctors say they're going to fix my leg," she said, her voice small but brave. "That's right," Ellie confirmed, moving to her side and taking her hand. "They're going to put you to sleep so you won't feel anything, and when you wake up, your leg will be in a cast, but it will be on the right path to healing." "Will Mom sign the papers? They said they need a parent." Ellie hesitated, unsure how to answer. The legal situation was complicated. As a grandparent, she might not have the authority to consent to medical procedures, especially with Rachel present in the same hospital. The doctor cleared his throat. "In emergency situations involving minors where guardianship is unclear, we can proceed with treatment that's medically necessary with the consent of available relatives. Given the circumstances, your signature will suffice for now, Ms. Whitaker." Relief washed over her. "Thank you. I'll sign whatever you need." After completing the necessary paperwork and promising Wren she would be there when she woke up, Ellie returned to the hallway where Cal and the officer were waiting. "We should talk somewhere private," Cal suggested. The officer led them to a small consultation room where 2 other police officers were already waiting. Once the door closed behind them, Cal took a deep breath. "First, I want to say how sorry I am for everything that's happened," he began. "What I have to tell you, it's not easy." Ellie steeled herself. "Just tell us the truth, Cal." He nodded grimly. 3 weeks ago, I found Rachel, Daniel, and the twins already in my cabin. They had stayed the night after getting caught in the storm. Daniel explained they had ventured into that area and couldn't make it back safely when the weather turned. "Your cabin?" Ellie interrupted. "That's your hunting cabin?" "Yes, I've had it for years. It's not on any official maps. Built it myself on a remote parcel." Cal continued. "I let them stay because the girls were exhausted and frightened. Daniel promised they'd leave once things improved, and the girls felt better." Cal paused, visibly struggling with his next words. "I left them there, for privacy, intending to return to the lodge myself. But the weather worsened. A hailstorm moved in. I was halfway back when I heard screaming. Children's voices. The room had gone completely still, all eyes fixed on Cal as he forced himself to continue. I followed the sounds and saw Rachel. Pushed Daniel off a cliff edge. He fell to his death. The twins were nearby, hiding behind trees. Rachel kept telling them to stay where they were. Ellie's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled sound escaping her throat. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was devastating. "Why didn't you report this immediately?" one of the officers demanded. Cal's shoulders slumped. "Rachel saw me watching. I wanted to confront her, but with the weather and the unstable cliff, I was afraid, for my own safety and for the children. So we went back to the cabin, and that's when she made me an offer. If I let her and the kids stay hidden in my cabin until someone naturally found them, she'd pay me enough to retire and disappear. Said she'd get the money from Daniel's life insurance." He couldn't meet Ellie's gaze as he continued. "I'm ashamed to admit I considered it, even agreed to it initially. For 3 weeks I brought them supplies, food, firewood, whatever they needed." $2 million, Ellie said quietly. "That was Daniel's life insurance policy. Rachel is the primary beneficiary, but only if Daniel died while they were still legally married, with no criminal charges or proven intent." Cal nodded. Rachel said her husband had recently consulted a lawyer about changing his will, creating trust funds for the twins in case of his death or divorce, but the paperwork wasn't finalized yet. One of the officers leaned forward. "So what changed? Why are you coming forward now? Why did you help Mrs. Whitaker?" Several things, Cal answered. Seeing those missing person posters everywhere, watching how the girls grieved their father, it wore on my conscience. But what really decided it was overhearing Rachel on the phone with her lawyer. She was planning to implicate me in Daniel's death to avoid sharing the money. That's when I knew I couldn't be part of this anymore. He turned to Ellie, genuine remorse in his expression. I'm sorry I didn't lead you directly to them when you showed me that poster. I was scared and selfish. But when I saw Rachel and only one child leaving the mountain this morning, I knew something was terribly wrong. That's when I called the police. Ellie stared at him, a complex mix of emotions churning within her. Gratitude that he had ultimately helped save Wren, fury that he had protected Rachel for so long, disgust at his willingness to profit from her son's murder. She killed my son, Ellie said, her voice barely above a whisper. And you helped her cover it up. I know, Cal acknowledged, and I'll accept whatever punishment comes my way. I just couldn't live with myself anymore. One of the officers stood. Mr. Jennings, we're placing you under arrest as an accessory after the fact to homicide. You have the right to remain silent. As the officer continued reading Cal his rights, Ellie tried to process everything she had learned. Daniel hadn't died in a tragic accident trying to save his family. He had been murdered by his wife in cold blood, with his children nearby as witnesses. The officers handcuffed Cal and prepared to lead him out. Before they did, he turned back to Ellie one last time. For what it's worth, Ms. Whitaker, I truly am sorry. Without me coming forward, you might never have found your granddaughter. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Ellie raised her hand, for a moment looking as though she might strike him, but then her arm dropped back to her side. You're right about one thing. Without you, I might never have found Wren and Ivy. For that, I thank you. But forgiveness, that's something I can't offer right now. After Cal was led away, the remaining officer explained the next steps to Ellie. We're moving to arrest Ms. Rachel Whitaker now. With Mr. Jennings's testimony and what we expect to learn from the children, we have enough to charge her with first-degree murder and attempted murder. What about Ivy? Ellie asked. Where is she now? She's in a secure room with a child advocate. Rachel has been kept separate since we became aware of the conflicting accounts. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in, looking directly at Ellie. Ms. Whitaker, your granddaughter is out of surgery. Everything went well, and she's in recovery now. You can see her soon. Thank you, Ellie said, relief evident in her voice. At least one thing was going right today. The officer stood. I need to join my colleagues. We're going to Rachel's room now to formally arrest her and read her rights. Would you like to be present? Ellie considered for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I need to look her in the eye. They walked together down the corridor to another wing of the hospital. Outside a room guarded by a uniformed officer, several police officials were gathered, speaking in low tones. They acknowledged Ellie with respectful nods as she and the officer approached. We're ready, the lead detective said. Ms. Whitaker, you can observe, but please allow us to handle this officially. Ellie agreed, and they entered the room. Rachel lay in a hospital bed, an IV in her arm, and monitors tracking her vital signs. Her expression hardened when she saw Ellie. Rachel Whitaker, the detective began formally. You are under arrest for the murder of Daniel Whitaker and the attempted murder of Eleanor Whitaker and Wren Whitaker. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective continued reading Rachel her rights, Ellie watched the woman who had killed her son. Rachel's face remained impassive until the detective mentioned Cal's testimony. He's lying, Rachel spat. Cal was the one who— Save it for your lawyer, the detective interrupted, continuing with the Miranda rights. When he finished, Ellie stepped forward. Why, Rachel, Daniel was a good husband to you. Rachel's expression twisted with bitterness. Good? Is that what you think? We had been arguing for months after I caught him cheating on me with some woman from his office. Daniel would never cheat, Ellie said firmly. That's not who he was. I saw him meeting up with women multiple times, Rachel insisted, with that friend of his, always the same excuse about networking and business meetings. And then he started talking about changing our prenuptial agreement. He was planning to leave me for someone else. Ellie shook her head. You don't know the full story. You just assumed the worst and acted on it. The hiking trip was supposed to fix things, Rachel continued, as if Ellie hadn't spoken. A way for us to reconnect as a family. But he kept denying everything, refusing to cut ties with that friend. I just snapped. So you pushed him off a cliff? Ellie asked incredulously. With your daughters nearby? They weren't supposed to follow us outside, Rachel said defensively. I told them to stay in the cabin. One of the officers placed handcuffs on Rachel's wrists, securing them to the bed rail. Ms. Whitaker, you'll remain in custody here until you're medically cleared for transport to the detention center. Rachel glared at Ellie. This isn't over. It was over the moment you decided to murder my son, Ellie replied coldly. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, and you'll never see those girls again. Leaving Rachel under guard, Ellie made her way back to the recovery area where Wren was beginning to wake from anesthesia. The child's leg was encased in a cast from foot to mid-thigh, elevated slightly on a pillow. Grandma Ellie? Wren murmured groggily as Ellie took a seat beside her bed. I'm here, sweetheart, Ellie assured her, gently taking her hand. The surgery went perfectly. You're going to be just fine. Where's Ivy? The girl asked, looking around blearily. She's here in the hospital, too. You'll see her soon, I promise. Later that evening, after Wren had been moved to a regular room and fallen into a deep, medication-assisted sleep, Ellie was granted permission to visit Ivy. The child was in a room down the hall, a social worker sitting quietly in the corner. Ivy looked up as Ellie entered, her eyes wide and uncertain. She resembled her sister so closely, yet the experiences of the past weeks had marked her differently, a wariness in her gaze that no 7-year-old should possess. Hi, Ivy, Ellie said softly, approaching slowly. Grandma Ellie? The girl's voice trembled. Where's Mom? Where's Wren? Ellie sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd the child. Wren is in another room, resting. Her leg was hurt, but the doctors fixed it. She's going to be okay. And Mom? Your mom is with some people who are trying to understand what happened on the mountain, Ellie said carefully. For now, you and Wren are going to stay with me. Ivy's lower lip quivered. Daddy's not coming back, is he? Mom said he had an accident. Ellie felt her heart breaking all over again. No, sweetheart, Daddy isn't coming back, but he loved you and Wren very, very much, and I'm going to make sure you always remember that. Tears welled in Ivy's eyes. Without warning, she launched herself into Ellie's arms, sobs racking her small frame. Ellie held her tightly, her own tears falling as she rocked her granddaughter. As Ivy's sobs gradually subsided into hiccups and then the even breathing of exhausted sleep, Ellie continued to hold her, thinking of all that had happened and all that lay ahead. She had lost her son, a wound that would never fully heal. But his daughters remained, precious links to the man she had raised and loved. They would need her strength now more than ever, and she was determined to provide it. Justice for Daniel would come through the courts. Rachel would face trial for her crimes, and Cal would answer for his role in concealing the truth. But the true justice Ellie believed would come in ensuring that Ivy and Wren grew up knowing they were loved and protected, that despite the terrible actions of one parent, they were not defined by that legacy. As moonlight filtered through the hospital window, casting soft shadows across Ivy's sleeping face, Ellie made a silent promise to her son. She would care for his daughters with every ounce of love and wisdom she possessed. She would help them navigate the difficult truths of their past while building a future filled with healing and hope. Ellie Whitaker had never shied away from challenging trails. She had spent a lifetime preparing for difficult journeys, and this, perhaps the most important one of all, would be faced with the same resilience and determination that had guided her through the mountains for more than 3 decades.